Hey, party patrons. Today we are continuing our yoked and tiered and ruffled series with these two skirts. And really the only difference between the two of these is this one has a flat yoke, no gathers up here, and this one does not. And it has multiple tiers of gathers. And then this one has little rows of ruffles sewn into the seams. And judging from how lifted they are and how white they are and how little they are, my guess would be that they took the strip of material, and you can really only do this if the material is thin enough, but they took the strip of material and folded it so you wouldn't have to do it would be more labor intensive to hem something this little. It would actually look better if you just folded like a really light, super gauzy material like this, and then gather it all on one side and then sew it in, right? That's the only difference. Yoke here, tiny inserted ruffles here, okay? Today we're gonna be focusing on the main element here, which is gathered flares. So we already did flare skirt, which is our A-line skirt. We're gonna use the A-line block today. And we've already done gathers, the dirndl skirt, but we're gonna do one where it's flared, but also gathered to give you like maximum fullness. And this one has a slit. I went over how to deal with that slit, how you gotta move over so that we have this, 3/4 of the front panel and 1/4 of this other panel, right side up, right side up. I'm gonna assume the back doesn't have a slit, so it can just all be one piece if the fabric is big enough for it. And then this one has no slit, okay? So let's do this one. I mean, they're the same, right? I am starting with our A-line block that we made several lessons back. We're laying down the yoke wherever you want. I'm gonna guess because the line is here's her wrist here. Here's her other wrist. And you see how this line is not, it's like right around the same spot. So I'm gonna go with 8 inches down. This would be a waistband. What I would do is I would remove 1 inch up here, and then I would go down 8 inches here, and then start making my tiers, right? Now, the reason why I think that it's an A-line and not a princess or a dart is it doesn't look like the design is broken in the places where there would typically be darts or princess lines. That's why I think it is an A-line look where it's fairly fitted here anyway. It's just a little bit looser as you go like past, 4 inches down. And that's why I think this is an A-line yoke and not a princess seam yoke like the other ones. I have taken my, when I did this, I always mark those blocks center front on fold. So to demo that, I do have my center front on fold today. I've marked all my notches, and yeah, I'm gonna go bring it down 1 inch, and then I'm gonna add the waistband, which I've already shown you. I'm lowering it 1 inch, and then I'm gonna add like a 2-inch waistband here, okay? And then I want this to be about 8 inches down from the original top of the skirt. So that's 8 inches down from the original top of the skirt. I love how I put the staple right there. Good job, me. And then you're gonna go down 8 inches. And then again, we're giving it that nice curve. and this is the yoke. And we're gonna separate. This is the original bottom of the A-line block I have. Do you remember last week when I said you do the whole length of however long you want your skirt to be, okay? So here's how I see things for people who are looking for some sort of measurement, okay? So this is 8 inches down, and so that gets you to about crotch level, right? Think about the inseam of your jeans. I wear, what do I wear? I wear like about a 30 inseam. I'm 5'5". And so if I want something to be about ankle length, okay? So if you're trying to like get to ankle a little longer than that, that's where you're approximating the bottom skirt. So all this length should be, you know, if you want an ankle length, 30 inches. If you're taller, longer. If you want a midi, you get the drift, right? So you're gonna make the whole skirt and then you're gonna cut it up. You see how these two are cut up differently? You're gonna cut it up and you're gonna separate. Well, first you're gonna draw them and then you're gonna hold it up to a mirror and be like, do I like these proportions? Even if the skirt is not for you, you know, hold it up to a mirror and see how the vertical proportions look in the mirror, like standing upright, okay, against a person. And you're gonna do these curves, right? You're gonna measure down. You're gonna do these curves, and the curves are gonna sit kind of in the same spot every time. And then you're going to cut and separate them. So this is the yoke. Whatever style number this is, the yoke does not have any sort of cuts or anything. So this does not need to be right side up. So cut one self, you know, size 4, front yoke. We're gonna cut here and separate from the tier. Let's say this is the tier. This is the sew line, okay? So to remind you to add seam allowance later, sometimes you just gotta write that there, sew line. This is the sew line. I'm removing this notch. Now we're gonna take this and we're gonna split it up. And it kind of depends on how much you wanna gather it. You know, if you wanna gather it a ton, and where you wanna gather it a little bit. And I'm just gonna say, this is gonna be 1.5x. Let me tell you right now, I would start conservatively, you know, on the lower end. And I'm gonna show you why later in this video, okay? But I'm gonna go with 1.5x for my gather, okay? Let's pretend that's what makes this fabric look magical. This is exactly 10 inches. 10 inches is what? 25.3 centimeters. Oh no, 25.4 centimeters, okay? And I want this to be 15 inches, you know, this to be 15 inches. Now, another measurement I need is how far up this goes, okay? Because I don't, so I'm gonna line this up. And you see how when we get to sew line corner, we are 1.5 inches up. That's 3.8 centimeters. So since this is 10, I'm gonna cut this up into 5 2-inch sections. This is 12 3/4. So divide that by 5. So 2.55 inches. That's just a guiding kind of how you're gonna split this up. So take this measurement, divide it by 5 and just mark it out. and take this measurement, divide it by 5, and mark it out. And this does not have to be the most precise math that ever mathed. It's just so we can kind of figure out where we're going to split these up. So and I am going to just, so that we are keeping track of everything. Here's a very wide piece of paper that I folded on one side because we're gonna want like one long piece, right? Center front on fold. Obviously, you don't have to slash and spread both the left and the right. We're just gonna do one side and then we're going to, you know, cut the two folds together. Do you remember when we measured how the hip part was 1.5 inches higher than the center front? So your center front at waist is going to be here, and we'll notch the center front. And then the hip is going to end up somewhere at 1.5 inches up here. You know, the curve is going to go like this somehow. And we're adding 5 inches, right? Because we're going from 10 inches to 15 inches. So we're adding 5 inches. And we have 5 pieces. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. We need to figure out how big to make these 4 gaps. So 5 divided by 4 is 5/4 of an inch. So 1 1/4, right? And then I'm going to put this here. And then another 1 1/4. Do you see this line that I drew that was like horizontal? Okay. Line up that line with where you're putting it. And then another. And then another 1 1/4. Look at that. Look at that. Do you see how that hip goes right at 1.5 inches, right where it's supposed to be? Because I use my guidelines to create this curve. Oh my gosh, right? And now we're gonna true this curve. I'm just gonna use a red because just to make things really clear as to where I want to draw my line. Now remember, you want this to be 90 degrees, at least for a little bit. So we're gonna keep this fairly straight. And you want this to be 90 degrees, at least for a little bit, so that, you know, when it sews into the back, it's gonna be a nice smooth curve. And we're connecting all of that together. And that's a good place to be, I think. You see how it's fairly straight there and straight there, and it's kind of averaging out these curves in here. And then go ahead and add your seam allowance. And then we're gonna do the same here. We're going to make sure it's a little bit straight here, at least a little bit. And of course, it's gonna be a little bit straight over here. There we go. And do you see how they're not perfectly parallel, but they should be like similarly curved. They should be close to parallel. Okay, so when they gather, they like lay nicely. Okay, now that's it. We're adding the seam allowance here. We're adding the seam allowance here. And then we are stapling it all up very neatly. And then we're going to cut the whole piece. And then we notch center front. And, you know, if you want to add a notch, you know, somewhere kind of around here, just because it's so long. And so the sewers will be like, oh, let's match the center front and let's match this to the part in a yoke. You know, have some of those matching notches, you know, to help guide the sewing. Great. You know, add another one here. Great. And that's it. And then you label this, you know, if you have a slit, you know what to do. Otherwise, here's our grain from before. And this is cut one self, not right side up. And then this can be skirt tier 1 front. Now, the reason why I thought you should go conservative on how much you're gathering that top is now that you're here, you have to 1.5x this thing. This is 12 3/4 of an inch. And you're gonna have to increase this. You're gonna get some really big pattern pieces is what I'm saying. And they might get to a point where they won't fit on your pattern. And maybe you need to add some cut lines. You have to think about those things. Like if you have a skirt like this, especially something like this where it's a little bit sheer and there's no distracting pattern at all, do you want a center front seam? You know what I mean? I think that would look really ugly, to be honest. Something like this where it's a little bit busier and there's a lot of stuff going on. Also, there's a slit. Like if there was a center back seam, like it would be less noticeable because of the print. But something like this, when you have something sheer and you have a seam, it's especially noticeable because it's no longer sheer, that one section. So, you know, keep those things in mind. The first time you do a skirt like this, keep your gathers a little bit on the conservative, smaller side and work your way up from there when you start getting used to wielding big patterns and laying out markers. And if you have really wide fabrics, like if you use like a cotton or linen, they tend to be on the wider side. Like you can get cottons and linens. Linens will typically go like 56 inches wide. But silks, like anything that's like crepey and drapey like this, is going to be more like 40 inches, 38 inches wide. So you're going to do this again where you're doing the math and you have 12, this is 19 and an 1/8 inches is going to be the gather for the next tier. Also, here's another design thing. These do not have to have identical gathers, okay? You can have like, this actually looks like this has less gathers up here than here. Like this looks way more gathered than here. So you could do a 1.5x here and you could do a 2x down here. So just thinking about your design and how you want things to look, you could also do that as well. This actually looks like the same amount of gathers in each tier, but this one looks like 2 different levels of gather. As usual, drop me your questions in the comments. Keep adding skirts you want to learn. Keep voting on the existing skirt pictures in the Discord thread, and I'll see you in the next video.